By 1900, the average Briton was eating close to 90 pounds of sugar a year. Think about that. A locked cabinet luxury from 1650 had become an everyday engine of empire, trade, taxes, ports, and factory food. This is how sugar spent 8,000 years conquering the world. A rare crystal moved from medicine and royal display into tea, bread, and the hidden machinery of ordinary life. And every step down in price carried a cost somewhere else. Oceans redrawn, fortunes financed, and millions pulled into one of the darkest labor systems in human history. The date to watch is 1493, but the story starts earlier, with a grass that tasted impossibly sweet. Sugar is strange because it looks simple. A white grain, a spoonful, a cube. It disappears the moment it touches heat, water, or the tongue. But behind that vanishing act is one of the longest supply chains in history. Tropical fields, boiling houses, shipholds, refineries, taxes, revolts, beet farms, chemistry labs, and supermarket shelves. To understand sugar, you have to follow it from a chewed cane stalk to a crystal, from a crystal to a commodity, and from a commodity to a force powerful enough to change what people planted, where ships sailed, and who controlled entire islands. The first sugar was not white, dry, or sparkling. It was a wet green stalk, taller than a person, with a waxy skin and a fibrous heart. Imagine cutting into it with a stone blade. The outside is tough and squeaks under pressure. The inside splinters into pale threads. Then the juice hits the tongue, grassy at first, then shockingly sweet, with a clean rush that almost feels like fruit without the fruit. Before crystals, before mills, before trade, sugar was something you chewed. Researchers identify New Guinea as a key early domestication center for Saccharum officinarum, around 8000 BCE. In the highlands and nearby islands, people were already shaping landscapes with gardens, drainage, and plant selection millennia before European maps had names for the Pacific. Cane was not a seed crop like wheat. It was cloned by cuttings. A piece of stalk with a joint could be placed back into damp soil, and the same sweetness could return, season after season. Austronesian voyagers later carried useful plants across islands in canoes: taro, banana, yam, coconut, and cane. By around 6000 BCE, that movement had spread cultivated cane across island Southeast Asia. Sugar at this stage was portable sweetness, a chewable energy strong enough to be worth carrying across open ocean. But chewing cane has a limit. The fibers turn dry and woody. The real revolution came when people stopped treating sugarcane as a snack and started asking what happened if you pressed the juice out entirely. The first great invention in sugar history was the squeeze. Someone learned that cane could be crushed, twisted, pounded, or pressed until the juice ran out. Fresh cane juice is cloudy, greenish, and alive with smell. Cut grass, wet straw, and a sweetness that catches in the throat. Leave it in tropical heat, and it changes fast. It foams, it sours, it ferments. So the next leap was heat. Boil the juice and water disappears. The smell thickens. What began as fresh grass becomes syrup. Darker, heavier, caramel-edged, sticking to the rim of the pot. In early South and Southeast Asian settings, this concentrated sweetness was pressed into rough cakes and lumps, what later traditions called jaggery or gur. A pot of reduced cane juice turned a tropical plant into a trade object. Fresh cane belongs to the field. Syrup and solid sugar can leave the field. They can be packed, taxed, gifted, sold, and carried across dry roads and sea routes. The taste changed too. The bright snap of cane became a deep brown sweetness, smoky from fuel, mineral from the pan, sometimes gritty on the teeth. A field had to be cut at the right time. A press had to crush before the stalk dried. A boiling pan had to be watched so the syrup did not scorch. Labor, timing, fire, and storage all lined up around a taste. And once that happened, the next question was inevitable. If syrup could be made thick, could sweetness be made solid, dry, and almost permanent? The place where sugar becomes the thing we recognize is India. Long before sugar filled European kitchens, Indian producers learned to clarify cane juice, boil it down, seed it, cool it, and coax it into dry grains that could survive distance. Picture the process. a clay pot of boiling juice thickening towards syrup. A small pinch of seed crystals dropped in. The whole mass stirred and cooled, then spread onto trays, where the grains solidify like pale sand. Once drained and dried, those crystals could be packed into sacks and loaded onto oxen or boats. A seasonal crop became a year-round commodity. Sanskrit preserves the clue. Shakara meant gravel, grit, or sugar, a word that would travel into Persian and Arabic as sukar, then into medieval Latin as sugar. Another word, khanda, meaning a piece or fragment, traveled into the word candy. Indian sugar was valued enough that outsiders noticed. Chinese accounts from the first millennium describe interest in Indian sugar-making knowledge, and by the early medieval period, cane cultivation was moving westward toward Persia. Indian craftspeople worked without thermometers, reading the process by sight, smell, and texture. The size of bubbles, the way syrup sheeted from a ladle, the moment a drop cooled into grain instead of glue. The result was astonishing to people who knew only honey. Honey is floral, sticky, and variable. Sugar crystals are clean, dry, bright. They could sweeten medicine, decorate elite foods, be dissolved, pounded, molded, or traded by weight. A spoonful could be counted, valued, and shipped. And once sweetness could be shipped, merchants and empires began to count it. By the 6th century, sugar cultivation and processing had reached Persia, where it entered a civilization already famous for gardens, irrigation, and luxury crops. Cane is thirsty. It wants heat, water, and organized labor. Persian canal systems could deliver all three across desert margins, where rain never could. In elite kitchens and medical traditions, sugar was prized as a substance that could preserve fruit, carry spices, and make bitter preparations easier to swallow. In a world where most sweetness came from dates, grapes, figs, or honey, crystallized cane sugar had a different personality. It could turn rose petals into preserves and almonds into confections. It could make medicine feel like pleasure. The expansion of Islamic rule after the 7th century accelerated its movement. Sugar followed irrigation into Mesopotamia, Syria, Egypt, North Africa, and eventually Al-Andalus in Iberia. Arabic carried the word sukar across markets. Mills, presses, boiling houses, and refining knowledge traveled with it. Think of what that means concretely. A Persian governor who controlled the canal feeding a sugar district controlled a crop worth more per pound than almost any grain. Cane fields needed standing water at exact stages of growth, which meant only those who could command canals, corvée labor, and trade permits could command sweetness. When the map of irrigated land overlapped the map of sugar, it also became the map of fiscal power. Cane always had a geographic demand. It would not grow everywhere. So sugar was never just a recipe, it was a map. And when that map reached the Mediterranean, Europeans would learn to desire something they could not easily grow at home. In the medieval Mediterranean, sugar crossed a line. It stopped being only an Eastern luxury and became a European obsession. Crusaders encountered sugar in the Levant and called it a kind of sweet salt, because to them, crystals belonged to the family of minerals as much as food. Venetian and Genoese merchants handled Eastern goods through ports where pepper, silk, dyestuffs, and sugar moved under watchful eyes. Cyprus, Sicily, and parts of Iberia became testing grounds for cane cultivation under Mediterranean conditions. Medieval sugar was sold in cones and loaves, hard enough that cooks needed nippers or knives. Picture a kitchen where a servant scrapes sugar from a dense white cone, the grains falling like edible stone. It sweetened spiced wine, preserved quince, coated nuts, and appeared in banquets as sculptures called subtleties, castles, animals, saints, and heraldic symbols made partly to be admired before they were eaten. In 14th century Venice, refined sugar sold for the equivalent of many days of a craftsman's wages per pound. Sugar was status you could put on the table, but its use was still narrow. Most Europeans did not spoon sugar into daily drinks because daily drinks did not yet demand it, and sugar cost too much. Physicians used it in syrups and electuaries. Apothecaries sold it beside medicinal ingredients. The more Europeans wanted sugar, the more they faced the same problem. Cane needed warm islands, controlled water, and hard labor, so sugar pushed Europe outward. It trained merchants to think in islands. It trained investors to think in mills. It trained rulers to see a tropical crop as a strategic prize. The Mediterranean was the rehearsal. The Atlantic would be the main stage. Before the Caribbean, sugar moved through Atlantic islands off the coasts of Africa and Europe. Madeira, the Canary Islands, São Tomé, and Cape Verde became crucial stepping stones. They were warm enough for cane, close enough to European capital, and small enough to be transformed entirely. Madeira, claimed by Portugal in the 15th century, became famous for sugar and was exporting significant quantities to European markets by the 1450s. Forests were cleared, water channels were built, mills crushed cane. European merchants learned how quickly sugar could turn an island into an engine. The pattern was brutal in its simplicity. Take land suited to cane, bring in capital and technology, force or coerce labor, export sweetness to distant consumers. São Tomé, sitting in the Gulf of Guinea, became especially important in the late 15th and early 16th centuries. By the 1520s, it was among the world's leading sugar producers, and it linked island plantations with enslaved African labor before the Americas became the main destination. The physical demands of cane made exploitation tempting. Cane has to be cut low, hauled fast, crushed before its sugar declines, then boiled in heat that turns the boiling house into a place of smoke, steam, and exhaustion. A missed harvest window could ruin a year's profit. Mills, credit, shipping, forced labor, export markets, and European appetite were locking together across these islands before a single stalk grew in the Americas. Then Columbus carried cane cuttings west on his second voyage, and the plant that had traveled from New Guinea to India, Persia, and the Mediterranean was about to meet the largest land grab in modern history. In 1493, on his second voyage, Christopher Columbus carried sugarcane seedlings to Hispaniola. The first recorded sugarcane harvest there took place in 1501, and Hispaniola had a functioning sugar mill by 1516. Cuba began growing cane in 1523. Those dates look harmless on a timeline. They are not. They mark the moment sugar became an American crop, and the Caribbean became a target for extraction on a new scale. Hispaniola was not empty land. It was home to indigenous Taino communities whose lives were shattered by conquest, forced labor, disease, and violence. Early Spanish colonists searched for gold, but cane offered another form of wealth, renewable, exportable, and hungry for land. By the 1520s, mills were being built across Hispaniola and Cuba. The mill was the heart of the new landscape. Cane fields radiated around it. Roads led toward it. Workers raced cut cane toward its rollers. Inside, stalks cracked and flattened. Juice ran into channels. Fires burned beneath kettles. The air smelled sweet, sour, smoky, and metallic all at once. Sugar in the Americas was industrial agriculture before the Industrial Revolution. Fields synchronized with machines, boiling houses, skilled technicians, coopers, carpenters, animals, ships, credit, and distant buyers. A small food decision redrew maps because European demand made tropical islands strategic. A place could become valuable not because of gold under the ground, but because cane could grow above it. The Caribbean, which from a European point of view had first appeared as a route to somewhere else, became a center of world commerce. But the expansion carried a question that investors answered with increasing cruelty. Who would do the work? Sugar did not become cheap because the plant suddenly became easy. It became cheap because empires built systems that pushed the true cost onto conquered land and enslaved people. The Transatlantic Slave Trade Database estimates that slaving vessels embarked about 12.5 million captives from Africa and landed about 10.7 million in the Americas. A large share were forced into plantation economies in Brazil and the Caribbean, where sugar was one of the dominant crops. In the French colony of Saint-Domingue in the 1780s, roughly 500,000 enslaved people produced about 40% of Europe's sugar and more than half of its coffee, on an island roughly the size of Maryland. Mortality on Caribbean sugar plantations ran so high that populations required constant replenishment from the slave trade. Historians estimate that on many Jamaican and Barbadian estates in the 18th century, life expectancy after arrival was under 10 years. Shrink the lens further. A cane field has razor-edged leaves that cut skin. Harvest comes under tropical heat. The boiling house ran through the night, 18-hour shifts common during crop season, with fires that had to stay hot, and syrup that could scald anyone who stumbled. Enslaved Africans brought knowledge, skill, languages, religions, foodways, and resistance into these worlds. But the plantation system tried to reduce people to labor units. It was resisted from the start, through flight, sabotage, negotiation, cultural survival, revolt, and the creation of maroon communities in mountainous and forested regions. Sugar's sweetness sat on top of organized violence. The whiter the sugar became through refining, the easier it was for distant consumers to forget the smoke, blood, and coercion behind it. That forgetting became part of the business model. By the 17th century, sugar had turned Brazil and Caribbean islands into some of the most profitable colonial zones on Earth. Portuguese Brazil became a major producer early, with mills clustered in the northeast. Then Barbados, settled by the English in the 1627, underwent a dramatic transformation. In the 1640s and 1650s, planters shifted heavily toward sugar, and the island's entire social structure changed with it. Small farms gave way to large plantations because cane demanded capital. Mills, boiling houses, animals, skilled managers, barrels, shipping connections, and enslaved labor. Barbados is only about 166 square miles, yet by 1080 roughly 60,000 enslaved people outnumbered the white population, nearly 5 to 1. The colony was exporting around 8,000 tons of sugar a year by the 1660s. Laws hardened racial slavery into a permanent, inherited status. This is one of sugar's clearest causal chains. European taste increased prices. High prices rewarded plantation expansion. Plantation expansion demanded labor. Labor demand fed the Atlantic slave trade. Slave-produced sugar lowered prices. Lower prices expanded everyday consumption. The loop fed itself. Sugar also changed what people drank. When tea, coffee, and chocolate entered European habits, they were bitter. Sugar made them socially irresistible. The cup on the table and the cane field across the ocean became part of one system. By the late 17th century, that system was not just feeding appetites, it was shaping law, finance, warfare, and the future of the Atlantic. Sugar's conquest of Europe rode in with three bitter drinks: tea from China, coffee from the Islamic world and later colonial plantations, and chocolate from the Americas. Each had its own history, but sugar tied them into daily ritual. A bitter cup became a sweet pause. A stimulant became a habit. A luxury became breakfast. In Britain especially, sweet tea changed the rhythm of the day, delivering quick calories to workers moving toward factories, wage labor, and urban crowding. Jam, treacle, cakes, and sweetened bread helped stretch diets that were often monotonous. Sugar also became a tax object. By the 1760s, British customs duties on sugar brought in roughly £500,000 a year, a significant share of the colonial revenue that financed naval expeditions and Atlantic wars. Look at four ports and their ledgers. London refined and consumed. Bristol fitted out slave ships. Liverpool, by the 1790s, handled more than 40% of Europe's slave trade. Lisbon moved Brazilian sugar to Mediterranean markets. Ships did not simply carry sugar one way. They carried manufactured goods, credit, enslaved people, plantation products, and paperwork in networks that connected a dock worker, a refiner, a plantation bookkeeper, an enslaved cane cutter, a merchant banker, and a tea-drinking family who might never think of the others. Raw sugar arrived brown, sticky, and smelling faintly of molasses. Refineries clarified, filtered, boiled, and molded it into white loaves. Consumers saw purity. Investors saw margin. States saw revenue. And abolitionists would eventually force the public to see something else: the people hidden inside the price. By the late 18th century, sugar had become so common in Britain that refusing it could become a political act. Abolitionist campaigns asked consumers to boycott sugar produced by enslaved labor, especially West Indian sugar. This was an extraordinary idea. the breakfast table as a place of protest. Pamphlets, sermons, petitions, and sugar bowls entered the same argument. Some families bought East Indian sugar or went without. Women, often excluded from formal politics, became important participants in consumer activism because household purchasing had moral force. In 1807, Britain abolished its transatlantic slave trade. In 1833, Parliament passed the Slavery Abolition Act, abolishing slavery across most of the British Empire, though emancipation was followed by apprenticeship, and compensation went to slave owners, not to the formerly enslaved. The British government paid out roughly £20 million, equivalent to about 40% of the national budget at the time. Sugar did not emerge clean from this transition. Plantation labor systems shifted into indenture and other coercive arrangements across the Caribbean, Mauritius, Fiji, and elsewhere, drawing workers from India, China, and other regions under contracts that could be harsh and restrictive. But something permanent had changed. Sugar had taught activists that a commodity could be investigated morally. A sweetener was no longer just a sweetener. It had a chain of custody. It had a labor history. It had a politics. That idea still shapes modern debates about chocolate, coffee, palm oil, cotton, and seafood. Sugar helped invent the consumer conscience, not because sugar was innocent, but because it was not. And even as abolitionists fought cane slavery, another revolution was rising from a root in European soil. For centuries, Europe craved sugar, but could not grow cane in its cold fields. The solution came from a different plant, the sugar beet. In 1747, the German chemist Andreas Sigismund Marggraf showed that beet roots contained the same kind of sugar as cane. His student Franz Karl Achard later built the first commercial beet sugar factory in Silesia in 1801. At first, beet sugar was a curiosity, not a global threat. Then war changed the economics. British naval blockades during the Napoleonic Wars cut cane sugar supplies to continental Europe, and Napoleon, in 1811, ordered 79,000 acres of beet planted across France and issued imperial decrees supporting beet sugar factories. Here is the chain. A tropical plantation crop helped build Atlantic empires. Naval war cut access to that crop. European states funded chemistry and agriculture. Beet sugar made temperate Europe less dependent on cane colonies. By the 1880s, European beet sugar output had overtaken cane sugar in world trade, supplying more than half of global production by the 1890s. Farmers planted beets. Factories sliced them, diffused the sugar into hot water, purified the juice, evaporated it, and crystallized it. The smell was different from cane, earthy, rooty, heavy with steam. The result, once refined, was chemically the same sucrose. Most consumers could not tell the difference in the bowl. It broke cane's monopoly. Sugar no longer had to come only from tropical stalks under plantation conditions. Governments began using tariffs, bounties, and colonial preference systems to protect producers. The crystal was now at the center of industrial policy. As supply grew, sugar slipped deeper into ordinary life, no longer a rare sign of status, but a daily expectation. The 19th century turned sugar from a luxury commodity into an industrial ingredient. In Britain, per-person consumption rose from around £4 a year in 1700 to close to £90 by 1900. That is not just more dessert. It is a change in the architecture of eating. Sugar went into tea, jam, biscuits, condensed milk, canned fruit, sauces, medicines, and cheap sweets. The new food factories loved it because sugar preserved, flavored, colored, and bulked. It helped fruit last beyond harvest. It made bitter cocoa friendly. It gave workers quick calories in cities where time was sold by the hour. Children saw it in penny sweets and sticky shop windows. Adults saw it in tea breaks and packaged goods. The texture of sugar changed modern memory. The snap of boiled sweets, the crunch on a biscuit top, the soft collapse of jam, the glossy pull of caramel. Refineries became urban landmarks. Railways and steamships moved raw and refined sugar faster than old sailing networks. Scientific agriculture increased yields. Colonial governments built infrastructure around export crops. At the same time, sugar's cheapness made its history harder to see. When something becomes affordable, it starts to feel natural, as if it has always belonged to everyone. But cheap sugar was not natural. It was engineered through centuries of botanical movement, imperial violence, chemistry, tariffs, shipping, refining, and mass retail. By 1900, a working family could encounter sugar several times a day without seeing a cane field or beet factory. That invisibility was sugar's final conquest. It won not by remaining exotic, but by becoming background. Sugar's modern power comes from the fact that it vanishes into almost everything. Chemically, table sugar is sucrose, a molecule made of glucose and fructose linked together. People did not need molecular diagrams to understand its usefulness. They knew what it did in the hand and mouth. It feeds yeast in dough. It browns through caramelization and other heat reactions. It traps water in jams. It softens cakes. It sharpens acidity in fruit. It takes the edge off bitterness. It turns medicine into syrup and celebration into texture. That versatility made sugar a perfect partner for industrial food. A manufacturer could use it for taste, color, preservation, mouthfeel, and habit, all at once. Pull a jar of pasta sauce, a tub of yogurt, and a can of soup from a modern pantry, and read the labels. Sugar appears in all three, often listed under different names, because reformulation hid it in plain sight. Population-level health authorities now track added sugars because modern consumption patterns are very different from the world where sugar was rare and eaten mostly on special occasions. The American Heart Association recommends no more than 25 grams of added sugar a day for women and 36 for men. The average American currently consumes closer to 77 grams. The old story of sugar was how to get sweetness out of the grass. The modern story is how to notice sweetness once it has dissolved into the system. Look at a map of the modern world through sugar, and strange lines begin to glow. New Guinea, around 8000 BCE. India, where crystals first formed in drained clay pots. Persia, where canal networks turned cane into fiscal power. Cyprus and Sicily, rehearsal stages for plantation capitalism. Madeira, exporting thousands of tons before 1500. São Tomé, connecting African labor to island mills. Hispaniola in 1516 with its first mill. Cuba in 1523. Barbados by 1680 with 60,000 enslaved, producing 8,000 tons a year. Brazil with mill counts in the hundreds by the 1600s. And Saint-Domingue, the island that changed everything. In the 1780s, that French colony produced 40% of Europe's sugar on the labor of roughly 500,000 enslaved people. The Haitian Revolution, beginning in 1791, overthrew slavery and French colonial rule, and led to Haitian independence in 1804, the first free black republic in the world. The sugar system had created a social order so brutal that its destruction became a world historical event. By the 1890s, European beet factories were producing more than half of world sugar output. By 1900, British workers were eating 90 pounds a year. Subscribe to Tales of the Table. We follow the hidden histories of ordinary foods that quietly built the modern world. The crystal in the bowl is small enough to vanish on the tongue. The map it helped draw spans 8,000 years, 4 continents, and every kind of human ambition. And after all this movement, all this violence, invention, chemistry, and appetite, sugar returns to the place where the story began, an ordinary human desire for sweetness. Sugar's history is not a straight line from discovery to dessert. It is a chain of transformations. A grass became a chew became juice, juice became syrup, syrup became crystal, crystal became medicine, luxury, tax base, plantation crop, industrial ingredient, and invisible background. It built wealth in ports and palaces, but it also exposed the violence behind that wealth. It helped turn islands into factories, breakfast into a global habit, and consumer choice into a moral question. The deepest lesson is not that sugar is uniquely evil or uniquely wonderful. It is that ordinary foods are never only ordinary. They carry landscapes, labor, inventions, languages, and decisions inside them. Sugar looks like a simple crystal because refinement made it look that way. History puts the color back. The next time you see sugar, ask the better question. Not just how sweet is it, but how far did it travel to become ordinary? 8,000 years of migration, invention, empire, and resistance are sitting in your kitchen right now. Subscribe to Tales of the Table for more hidden histories of the foods we think we already know.